This is the lesson for 12-8, day 3. What you're going to be doing today is you are going to be determining the number of solutions. So your number of solutions, your final answer is either going to be 0, 1, or 2. If it's 1 or 2, you do have to do the quadratic formula, use the quadratic formula to find the 1 solution or the 2 solutions. If it's 0 solutions, you're just going to put 0 and there's nothing left to do. So the way that you're going to determine the number of solutions is you're going to look at something called the discriminant. The discriminant is b squared minus 4ac. It comes from this part of, it comes from this part of your quadratic formula. That's really called the discriminant, the b squared minus 4ac part. So when you're looking at that, if your radicand, now what the heck is a radicand? The radicand is the stuff that's inside the square root. That's the technical name for it. So if your stuff inside the square root, which is what you're going to get from b squared minus 4ac, if this ends up being a positive answer, there's going to be 2 solutions. You're going to get x equals a number and x equals some other number. If the radicand is equal to 0, so you figure out what b squared minus 4ac is. If you end up getting a 0 in your square root symbol, then there's 1 solution. So you're just going to get x equals 1 number. When you go to solve the quadratic formula, you're really going to get like x equals 2 and x equals 2. But there's only 1 technical answer of 2. If your answer inside the square root is negative, so you do b squared minus 4ac, you get a negative number. Again, remember that means that there's no solutions, it's an imaginary number. So then you're going to get that there is 0 solutions. So in your boxes in class kick, you're either going to type in 0, 1, or 2 for the number of solutions. And then if it's 1 or 2, you do have to use the quadratic formula to find your answers. So in this first example, this is going to be an example of 2 solutions. Your discriminant is going to end up being positive. So looking at this is what your questions are going to look like. The first thing that I would do, just like you did before, is find your A, your B, and your C. So your A is negative 1, that's the number in front of the x squared. Your B is the number in front of your x, that's negative 7. And your C is the negative 12. Now again, all that we need to figure out is the b squared minus 4ac part. When we do b squared minus 4ac, you're going to have negative 7 squared minus 4 times a, which is negative 1, times c, which is negative 12. You're not taking the square root or anything like that. It's just b squared minus 4ac. 7, you can type this right into your calculator exactly how it is. Be careful of your parentheses. You do need a parentheses around the negative 7 if you're going to type it in all at once. Negative 7 squared is negative 7 times negative 7, which is 49. Negative 4 times negative 1 times negative 12 gives you a negative 48. 49 minus 48 is 1. Remember, if your discriminant, which is what we got from b squared minus 4ac, is positive, we got a positive 1 as an answer, that means there are 2 solutions. If there are 2 on your homework, you do then need to go ahead and use the quadratic formula. I have it already done to save a little bit of time. So if you do it, you're going to have to plug in your a, b, and c into the quadratic formula. So negative of negative 7 plus or minus negative 7 squared minus 4 times negative 1 times negative 12 all over 2 times negative 1. You already figured out the discriminant here. So do you have to type that all back into the calculator? No. Just take your 1 and stick it under your square root symbol in your discriminant. So 7 plus or minus the square root of 1, which is square root of 1 is just 1. So then we're going to take and split our problem into 2 to find our 2 solutions. Remember, put the plus over to the left, put the minus over to the right. Our 2 answers then are negative 4 and negative 3. So again, when you do b squared minus 4ac, if you get a positive answer, there are 2 solutions. If the discriminant ends up equaling 0, there is 1 solution. So again, I would first identify your A, your B, and your C. Your A is 2, your B is negative 16, your C is 32. You're going to use the formula b squared minus 4ac. So b squared, you're going to have negative 16 inside parentheses squared minus 4 times 2 times 32. Go ahead and multiply those out. When you do that, negative 16 squared minus 4 minus 2, minus 4 times 2 times 32. Again, you could type that all in at once. When you do that, you end up with an answer of 0. Well, an answer of 0 for your formula ends up being one solution. Now, what does that actually look like with the quadratic formula? If you get that, you have to use the quadratic formula and figure out what that one solution actually is. So when we put in our a, b, and c values into the quadratic formula, you end up with a 0 right here for the discriminant. The square root of 0 is just 0. So when we split our problem into 2, you're going to have 16 plus 0 over 4 and 16 minus 0 over 4. Well, 16 divided by 4 is just 4. 16 divided by 4 is just 4. Your one solution to this problem is x equals 4. And again, that had one solution because when we did b squared minus 4ac, we got it equal to the discriminant equal to 0. For no solutions, what no solutions is going to look like is the discriminant is going to be a negative number. So again, the first thing that you want to do is identify your a, your b, and your c. Your a would be 2, your b would be 1, because remember there's really a 1 in front of that x, and your c would be 4. So our formula is b squared minus 4ac. b squared is going to be 1 squared minus 4 times a times c. So 1 squared minus 4 times 2 times 4, that ends up giving you a negative 31. Well, negative 31, that's going to end up being no solution because remember, this is really the square root of all that, which would end up being the square root of negative 31, which you can't do. That's an imaginary number, so there are 0 solutions. And again, it's 0 solutions because it's a negative number. If you actually took that and subbed it into the quadratic formula, which you don't need to do, because when it's 0, you could just leave it as 0 solutions, because there's no answer. But if you did that, you'd end up with this, and again, when you take that square root of negative 31, you can't do it. It's an imaginary number. There is no solution. So 0 is the number of solutions. After you finish this lesson, congratulations, you earned your first high school credit for algebra. Have a good summer.